The birth of Jacob, the beginning of a brotherly rivalry. In the scorching heat of the Middle East, where divine promises shaped generations, Rebekah carried more than just 2 lives in her womb. There was something extraordinary about her pregnancy, something that transcended the natural. The movements were intense, almost as if her children were fighting inside her. Anguished, Rebekah sought answers from God, and the message was clear. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be divided from your body. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came for the birth, the mystery began to unfold. The first boy was born with a reddish tone of skin and covered in hair, a figure that impressed those present. He was named Esau, but before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, a small hand appeared, firmly grasping Esau's heel, as if trying to hold him back so he wouldn't escape. This second boy was named Jacob, a name that carried a profound meaning. He who grasped the heel, or in a symbolic sense, the supplanter. From the beginning, the brothers followed different paths. Esau grew up as a skilled hunter, a robust and impulsive man who dominated the fields and won the heart of his father Isaac. Jacob, on the other hand, preferred the tents. He was introspective, observant, and above all, close to Rebekah, who saw in him a son with a special destiny. But their rivalry was not just a matter of different personalities. There was a future at stake, a birthright that carried spiritual and material blessings. Esau seemed unconcerned about these matters, living impulsively and in the moment. Jacob, however, observed every detail, silently planning. The decisive moment began to form when Esau, after an exhausting day of hunting, returned home hungry and vulnerable. Jacob saw the perfect opportunity to begin what would become one of the most intriguing and life-changing stories in the Bible. The exchange of birthright. Jacob, the silent strategist. It was a sultry afternoon in Canaan. The sun shone mercilessly, and each step left a dusty trail on the dry ground. Esau, Isaac's firstborn, was returning from another exhausting day of hunting. His muscular figure carried an empty bow and the haggard expression of someone who had found nothing to bring back. Sweat ran down his face, while his stomach growled, an orchestra of hunger and fatigue. As he approached the family tents, he was overcome by an irresistible aroma. Jacob, the youngest brother, was by the fire, stirring a pot of red lentils that gave off a scent capable of disarming anyone. Jacob, always alert, watched Esau with a shrewd eye. He knew that his brother was impulsive, and that hunger was the Achilles heel that he could use to his advantage. Esau, without thinking twice, approached and exclaimed, "Let me eat that red stew. I'm starving." Jacob, with the calm of someone who always waits for the perfect moment to act, looked up and replied, "I can give it to you, but I need something in return. First, sell me your birthright." It was a bold proposal. The birthright was more than an inheritance. It represented the position of spiritual and material leadership of the family, the continuation of God's covenant with Abraham. Esau, however, was ruled by his hunger. He laughed, finding the idea absurd. But at the same time, the smell of the lentils made his mouth water, and his mind could not see beyond the present moment. "I am about to die. What good will the birthright do me?" he said, disdaining something he could neither touch nor feel. Jacob did not back down. He knew that Esau was on the verge of giving in. Firmly, he demanded an oath. "Swear to me first." Esau, without thinking about the consequences, swore. The exchange was done. The birthright, which had once belonged to Esau, now belonged to Jacob. Esau took the bowl, devoured the lentils, and left. To him, the episode seemed insignificant, just a way to satisfy an immediate need. But Jacob knew that it was much more. He had not only acquired the birthright, he had taken the first step toward the fulfillment of something much greater. He understood that God's plan for his life required more than words. It was necessary to act at the right time, even if it meant defying family norms. Still, there was an obstacle ahead. The birthright would only be consolidated with the blessing of Isaac, who still saw Esau as the favorite son and rightful heir. Rebekah, the mother who knew Jacob's heart and believed in his mission, began to plan the next move. Jacob's destiny was about to be shaped by an act of courage and deceit. The deception to achieve the blessing, a plot between mother and son. The sun had already set on the horizon, and the stars were beginning to shine in the sky of Canaan, when Rebekah called Jacob for a conversation away from prying ears. Her voice carried the seriousness of someone who knew the weight of destiny. She knew that Esau was Isaac's favorite, but she also knew that God had greater plans for Jacob and could not allow the blessing to slip through her hands. "Jacob, listen to me carefully," Rebekah began, her somber expression reflecting the importance of what she was about to say. "Your father is getting old and can barely see. He asked Esau to bring him a dish of game, and after that, he will give him the blessing." Jacob, with his heart racing, just listened as his mother continued. "But this blessing must be yours. God has revealed that you will be the leader, the chosen one. Let's act before it's too late." The plan was bold, almost impossible to imagine in a family united by respect for tradition. Jacob was to pose as Esau in order to deceive Isaac and receive the blessing of the firstborn. He hesitated. "What if my father recognizes me? I am not like Esau. I have no hair on my arms, and my voice will give me away. Instead of a blessing, I may receive a curse." Rebekah, determined, left no room for doubt. "May the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I say." She brought Esau's best clothes, the smell of hunting impregnated in them, and covered Jacob's arms and neck with goatskins to imitate his brother's rustic hair. Then she prepared a delicious dish, just as Isaac liked, using meat that was already in the tent. Every detail was meticulously thought out so that the deception would be perfect. Jacob entered Isaac's room, his heart beating like a drum. The old patriarch, almost blind, smiled when he heard the voice of someone he believed to be Esau. "My son, how did you manage to hunt so quickly?" Jacob replied, trying to disguise his voice. "It was the Lord your God who put the prey in my path." Isaac, suspicious, asked Jacob to come closer. He touched his arms and felt the rough skin of the goatskins. He bowed his head, still uncertain, but the aroma of Esau's clothes seemed to confirm his identity. Finally, Isaac raised his hands and pronounced a blessing, handing over to Jacob the future spiritual and material leadership of the family, the continuation of the divine pact. Jacob hurriedly left, with the echo of the blessing still in his mind. The mission seemed accomplished, but he knew that the price of his actions would soon be revealed. Esau, upon discovering what had happened, would not remain silent. And so, Jacob's life was about to enter a new phase of challenges and escapes. The escape to Padan Aram, leaving everything behind. Esau's furious cry echoed through the tent and reached Jacob's ears like the roar of a wounded beast. Esau, betrayed, swore revenge. "As soon as the days of mourning for our father are over, I will kill Jacob." Rebekah, ever alert, realized that the time for action had come. She knew that Esau's words were not just an empty threat. Her older brother was a man of strength and impetuosity, and Jacob would have no chance against him. "You must leave, Jacob," Rebekah said, taking her son's trembling hands. "Go to my brother Laban's house in Padan Aram. Stay there until Esau's anger subsides." With a heavy heart, Jacob packed his few things and prepared for a lonely journey. He did not know when or if he would return to his homeland. Saying goodbye to his mother was a painful moment. Although she kept her strong appearance, Jacob knew that they both carried in their hearts the weight of the choices they had made. The first night on the road was one of silence and reflection. The silence of the vast desert was broken only by the sound of the wind and Jacob's careful steps. He was tired, both physically and emotionally, but he knew he had to keep going. It was on this journey that Jacob had a life-changing experience. When he stopped to rest, he took a stone as a pillow and lay down under the starry sky. His heart was filled with doubt and fear. Was God still with him after all he had done? While sleeping, Jacob had a dream that would change the course of his life. He saw a ladder that reached the heavens, and the angels of God were ascending and descending it. At the top, the Lord himself appeared, reaffirming the promise he had made to Abraham and Isaac. God not only confirmed that the land where Jacob was staying would be his, but he also promised to protect him wherever he went. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not abandon you until I have fulfilled what I have promised you. When he woke up, Jacob was filled with a mixture of fear and reverence. He lifted the stone he had used as a pillow and anointed it with oil, declaring that place Bethel, the house of God. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it, Jacob murmured, still in awe of the sight. But his journey was just beginning. Padan awaited him, with challenges he could not yet imagine, and Laban, his cunning uncle, was about to enter his story. The encounter with Laban, cunning and persistence to the test. When Jacob finally arrived in Padan Aram, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The weariness of the long journey was evident in his steps, but the sight of the well in the distance rekindled his strength. It was here that shepherds gathered to water their flocks, and he hoped to find information about his uncle Laban. As he approached, Jacob noticed a young woman of stunning beauty leading a flock. His eyes, still filled with tears from memories of Bethel, fixed on her. He discovered that her name was Rachel, daughter of Laban, the man he sought. With a gesture of strength and determination, Jacob rolled the heavy stone from the well to help her, an act that did not go unnoticed. Rachel, impressed, ran to warn her father, and Jacob was soon warmly welcomed by Laban. The reunion was marked by hugs and stories. But there was something in Laban's eyes that conveyed a silent calculation. Jacob, without knowing it, was about to face someone as cunning as he was. When he settled in, Jacob began working for Laban, and his dedication soon caught everyone's attention. He was not just an ordinary man. His intelligence and skills made him indispensable in the family business. But there was something that touched Jacob's heart even more: Rachel. The passion that was born at that first meeting grew with each passing day, and he decided that he would do anything to have her as his wife. Laban, noticing Jacob's affection for his daughter, saw an opportunity. "Work for me for 7 years, and I will give you Rachel in marriage," said his uncle, with a smile that had deeper intentions. 7 years of work seemed little to Jacob, because his love for Rachel was greater than any sacrifice. Day after day, he tended the flocks with zeal, facing the scorching heat of the day and the biting cold of the night, always with Rachel's face in his mind. But when the long-awaited wedding day arrived, Laban revealed his true nature. In the darkness of the night, he tricked Jacob into giving him Leah, his eldest daughter, as his wife. The disappointment was like a blow, but Jacob, recognizing the game of cunning he was now facing, did not give up on his goal. "Complete Leah's week," Laban proposed, "and after that, you can marry Rachel, as long as you work for me for another 7 years. Jacob agreed, moved by a love that overcame any obstacle. But his relationship with Laban was only just beginning, and the challenges that awaited Jacob in this land would test his patience, his faith, and his ability to overcome adversity. Jacob's growth, prosperity in the midst of adversity. As time passed, Jacob, now with 2 wives and a growing family, devoted himself tirelessly to his work under Laban. For years, he had faced the brunt of exploitation and broken promises. But something inside Jacob was changing. He was no longer the young man running away from home, but a man who was beginning to understand the depth of his calling and the role of divine providence in his life. Despite his challenging circumstances, Jacob prospered. He tended Laban's flocks with skill and dedication, and God was with him, blessing everything he touched. Laban's flocks multiplied, and his uncle's wealth grew greatly, thanks to Jacob's tireless work. But Laban, ever shrewd, watched Jacob's growing influence with a tinge of unease. It was during this time that Jacob decided to claim what was rightfully his. He proposed a deal to Laban, suggesting that he would keep the spotted and speckled animals for himself, while leaving the solid-colored ones for his uncle. It seemed like a fair and even advantageous proposition to Laban, but Jacob had a plan. Under God's guidance and with his natural intelligence, Jacob used ingenious methods to ensure that his flock would grow rapidly. He observed patterns, understood the behavior of the animals, and trusted in God's blessing to multiply his own flocks. Little by little, his wealth began to accumulate, and Jacob, who had previously been an exploited servant, began to build his independence. However, as Jacob's prosperity grew, so did the hostility between him and Laban's sons. Envy and resentment became palpable, creating an increasingly tense atmosphere. Even Laban, who had previously viewed Jacob as a source of profit, began to look at him with suspicion. Jacob knew that he could not remain under Laban's roof forever. God's calling on his life became clearer with each passing day, and he felt that the time to leave was near. But how could he escape Laban's manipulations and bring his family to safety? The nights of vigil became more frequent as Jacob sought answers and strength for the next step. Jacob's escape, a courageous step amid uncertainty. After years of hard work and growing tensions with Laban, Jacob realized that there was no way to stay in that place any longer. The wealth he had accumulated, although legitimate, was a source of envy and distrust. He knew that his presence was a burden to Laban and his sons, and the only solution was to leave. But how could he escape the clutches of a man as cunning and controlling as Laban? Then one night, as Jacob pondered his future, God appeared to him in a dream. The message was clear. It was time to return to the land of his fathers, the promised land. But the return would not be easy. In addition to facing the risk of Laban's pursuit, Jacob would have to face the past, with all its failures and consequences. He knew that this also meant meeting Esau again, the brother he had betrayed. Driven by faith and determination, Jacob began to plan his exit. He gathered his wives, children, servants, and flocks, explaining that the time had come to leave. Rachel and Leah, his wives, supported his decision, as they also felt neglected by Laban. With courage and strategy, they left in secret, taking advantage of the time when Laban was busy away from home. The journey was slow and full of uncertainty. Jacob led his family and possessions carefully, knowing that Laban would soon notice his absence. And indeed, the news reached Laban like a whirlwind. Enraged and determined to recover what he considered to be his, Laban gathered his men and set out in pursuit of Jacob. Meanwhile, Jacob pressed on, but fear grew in his heart. With each passing day, he knew that a confrontation with Laban was inevitable. But how could he, a simple man and his wives and children, face the wrath of such a powerful man? And moreover, what lay ahead after overcoming this battle? Jacob looked to the horizon, the weight of his decision on his shoulders. He knew the true test of his faith and courage was yet to come. The confrontation with Laban, justice in the midst of conflict. The tension was palpable when Jacob and his caravan finally spotted Laban and his men approaching on the horizon. Jacob's heart raced. He knew this meeting would be decisive. Laban was determined, not just out of anger, but out of a sense that something had been taken from him. When they finally met, Laban did not mince words. His voice echoed like thunder in the desert. "Why did you run away secretly, taking my daughters as prisoners of war? Why did you not allow me to give them a proper farewell? And why did you steal my gods?" Jacob, with the firmness of one who carried the truth, replied, "I ran away because I was afraid you would prevent me from leaving with my family. As for your gods, look for them among us. Whoever has them will die." It was a bold statement. But Jacob did not know that Rachel, his wife, had hidden Laban's idols. Laban, in his fury, began to search the tents. He searched among Jacob's possessions, turned every corner upside down, but found nothing. Rachel cunningly hid the idols under the saddle of a camel and avoided discovery. When the search was over, Jacob could not contain his indignation. He confronted Laban, recalling the years of hard work and injustice he had suffered. "For 20 years I have served in your house, tending your flocks. In all that time you have changed my wages 10 times. If it had not been for the God of my father, the God of Abraham, you would have sent me away empty-handed." Laban, though still resentful, realized that he had no more arguments. He knew Jacob was right, so they made a pact. On a hilltop, they erected a mound of stones as a witness to their covenant. There they promised not to harm each other and drew a symbolic boundary for their land. But as Laban returned to his home, Jacob's heart was not at ease. He knew that an even greater challenge lay ahead. Esau, the brother he had betrayed, was standing in his way, and the reunion promised to be as intense as a desert storm. The confrontation with Laban, justice in the midst of conflict. The dawn light was tinging the sky with golden hues when Jacob spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. It was Laban, advancing with his men toward the camp. Jacob's heart raced. He knew this meeting would not be a simple exchange of words. There were years of tension, lies, deceit, and hurt ready to explode at that moment. When Laban finally arrived, he dismounted from his camel with fury etched on his face. His voice cut through the silence of the desert like a blade. "Why did you run away in secret, Jacob? You took my daughters as prisoners of war, and did not even let me say goodbye to them. And how dare you steal my gods?" Jacob, though tense, stood firm. He knew his decision to leave was motivated by the need to protect his family. Still, the accusation of theft took him by surprise. With a direct look, he replied, "I fled because I was afraid you would prevent me from leaving with my family. But as for your gods, look for them among us. Whoever has them will die." Jacob's words resonated with a confidence he did not know he could not sustain. He did not know the secret that his wife Rachel was keeping. Laban, determined, began his search. He invaded the tents of Jacob, his wives and servants, turning everything upside down. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Rachel, with her characteristic cunning, had hidden her father's idols under the saddle of a camel. Sitting on them, she said in a calm but calculated tone, "Forgive me, my father, for not rising up before you, but I am indisposed." Laban, unaware of his daughter's ploy, passed on. When he did not find the idols, his countenance changed, but the fury remained latent. Jacob, realizing the injustice of the moment, let his indignation overflow. "For 20 years I have served in your house, Laban, taking care of your flocks, enduring cold nights and scorching days. I have never eaten a single lamb without your permission, and yet you have changed my wages 10 times. If it were not for the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed." Jacob's words came out like a flooding river, carrying all the bitterness accumulated over the years. Laban listened in silence, knowing that, as much as he wanted to deny it, Jacob was right. He was an unjust man, but also a father who loved his daughters and grandchildren. After the confrontation, both understood that continuing the fight would be useless. On top of a nearby hill, they erected a pile of stones as a witness to a new covenant. There, they swore that they would not harm each other. Laban would return to his land, and Jacob would go on his way. But Jacob found no relief. Although he had overcome this confrontation, he knew that the greatest challenge lay ahead. Esau, his brother, the man he had deceived years before, was approaching, and Esau was not coming alone. The reunion with Esau, the embrace that changed everything. The tension in the air was palpable. Jacob, now a man marked by a struggle with God, was approaching the moment that could change everything. The horizon revealed a figure he would recognize anywhere. Esau was coming toward him, accompanied by 400 men. Jacob knew that each step forward was a challenge to his courage, a confrontation with the weight of the choices he had made years ago. Before meeting Esau, Jacob took precautions. He placed the maidservants and their children in front, followed by Leah and her children, and lastly Rachel and Joseph. A careful formation, reflecting the emotional hierarchies of his heart. But something inside him changed after the encounter with the mysterious man in the Jabbok Valley. He was no longer the deceiver who trusted only in his cunning. He was Israel, the one who wrestled with God and won. With slow, controlled steps, Jacob advanced alone toward Esau. 7 times he bowed to the ground, a gesture of submission and humility. Each bow was a silent request for forgiveness, an acknowledgement of his mistake, and an attempt to build a bridge over the chasm he himself had created. And then, something unexpected happened. Esau, the man Jacob feared and whose fury he imagined to be implacable, ran toward his brother, not with weapons drawn, but with open arms. The impact of the embrace was stronger than any battle Jacob could imagine. Esau embraced him tenderly, and together the 2 brothers wept. That moment of reconciliation did not erase the past, but marked a new beginning. Jacob, with tears in his eyes, tried to offer the gifts he had prepared for Esau, but Esau refused. "I already have enough, my brother. Keep what is yours." Jacob insisted, saying, "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift. Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have welcomed me so well." Reluctantly, Esau accepted. For Jacob, it was not just a material offering, but a symbol of his transformation, of his willingness to make peace with the past. Esau then suggested that they travel together, but Jacob, fearing that his children and livestock would not be able to handle the pace, asked to go at his own pace. He knew that his journey, both physical and spiritual, needed to be made according to God's plan. Esau accepted and set out for Seir, while Jacob continued on to Sukkot, where he built shelters for his family and their flocks. Although reuniting with Esau brought relief and peace, Jacob knew that his journey was not yet complete. He carried a greater promise, a covenant with God that would transcend the limits of his own life. And so, as the wind blew gently over the fields of Canaan, Jacob looked toward the horizon, wondering what was yet to come. He knew that the God who had led him there had greater plans. His life, marked by ups and downs, continued to be written by divine hands, and the next chapter was about to begin. The altar at Bethel, a renewed commitment to God. Jacob felt the weight of the promises he had made to God in his youth. Bethel, the place where he had erected a memorial stone years earlier, was more than a geographic location. It was a spiritual landmark. Back then, fleeing from Esau's wrath, Jacob had promised that if God would protect him, he would return to consecrate him there. Now God was calling him to fulfill that promise and renew his commitment. The journey to Bethel did not begin without first requiring purification. Jacob, understanding the seriousness of God's calling, gathered his family and said, "Get rid of the foreign gods that are with you. Purify yourselves and change your clothes. Let us go to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers in the day of my distress." It was a moment of transformation for the entire family. The foreign gods and the idolatrous earrings were buried under an oak tree in Shechem. By this, Jacob symbolized that there was no room for the old life in the path of God's purpose. The God of Abraham and Isaac was the only one who would rule over his household. As they set out, the fear of God fell upon the surrounding cities, protecting Jacob and his family from attack. Once again, God's care guided his steps. When he reached Bethel, he built the altar and named the place El Bethel, acknowledging that their God had revealed himself to him in his flight. While Jacob was at Bethel, God appeared to him again. The promise made earlier was reaffirmed. "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a community of nations will come from you. Kings will come from you. And to you and your descendants I will give the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac. These words not only confirm God's favor, but they also expanded Jacob's responsibility. He was no longer just a man, but the patriarch of an eternal promise. Jacob's spiritual connection with God was deepened in that encounter. He set up a stone as a pillar, poured a drink offering on it, and anointed it with oil. It was more than a symbolic act. It was a declaration of faithfulness. The stone was a silent but powerful witness to the renewed covenant between God and Jacob. But Jacob's journey was not without pain. From Bethel he set out for Ephrathah, and along the way Rachel, his beloved wife, went into labor. The pains were intense, and it soon became clear that something was not right. As Rachel brought her second son into the world, her life ebbed away. With her last ounce of strength, she named the boy Benoni, the son of my sorrow. But Jacob, in an act of hope and faith, named the boy Benjamin, the son of my right hand. Rachel's death was a profound blow, but Jacob, marked by so many losses and encounters with God, knew that each event was aligned with God's purpose. Rachel was buried on the road to Ephrathah, and Jacob erected a pillar over her grave, a memorial that would stand for generations. As he looked at the stone, he saw more than the loss of his wife. He saw the continuation of God's promise to him. Even in the midst of his grief, Jacob continued on his path. His renewed commitment to God at Bethel and the birth of Benjamin were reminders that his life story was being written by the Creator himself. But the next challenge awaited him, and the journey continued. Jacob's legacy, the eternal blessing that shaped the tribes of Israel. Time had taken its toll on Jacob. His calloused hands, slower steps, and deep-set eyes showed a man who had experienced the weight of life and the glory of God's promises. But even in his old age, Jacob was not ready to rest. His greatest mission still lay before him: to bless his descendants and ensure that God's promise would endure through all generations. Gathered in Goshen, where his family prospered under the protection of Joseph, Jacob felt the weight of the moment. This was not just a family gathering. It was an event that would mark the foundation of the people of Israel. Jacob called his sons, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes, to convey the blessing that was not just his, but God's. First, he brought his grandsons Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. In that act, Jacob adopted them as his own, ensuring that Joseph would have a double inheritance among the tribes. When he extended his hands to bless them, he crossed his arms, placing his right hand on the youngest Ephraim and his left on Manasseh. Joseph tried to correct the gesture, but Jacob, now guided not by physical but by divine vision, insisted, "I know, my son, I know. He too will be great, yet the younger will be greater, and his descendants will be a multitude of nations." Jacob's blessing on Ephraim and Manasseh would be symbolic of Israel's future. God chooses the unexpected, strengthens the weak, and directs history according to his purposes. He then turned to each of his 12 sons, pronouncing blessings, warnings, and prophecies. Reuben, the firstborn, lost his preeminence because of his instability. Simeon and Levi, marked by violence, would be scattered among the tribes. Judah, however, received one of the greatest promises. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and to him the nations will obey. It was a messianic prophecy, pointing to the descendant of Judah who would bring redemption to the world. Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Benjamin also received specific words that would shape their tribes, but it was Joseph and Judah who bore the most powerful promises. When Joseph's turn came, Jacob poured out words of abundance and protection. Joseph is a fruitful bough by the well. His branches stretch out over the wall. They attacked him bitterly, but his bough remained firm, and his arms were strengthened by the hand of the mighty one of Jacob. Jacob's words were not mere statements. They were like seeds planted in the soil of history. They would blossom and form Israel's identity as God's chosen nation. After blessing his sons, Jacob made one final request. He wanted to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, along with Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah. This was not just a matter of eternal rest. It was an act of faith. Jacob knew that his family's future was tied to God's promised land, and even in death, he wanted to be rooted in the fulfillment of God's promises. Jacob laid down on his bed after blessing his sons. He knew his life was coming to an end, but he did not fear. Instead, his heart was at peace, knowing that he had done his part to fulfill God's purpose. But as his eyes closed on this world, the cries of his sons echoed in the room, and Joseph's heart ached. He knew that the journey was far from over. The promise given to Jacob now rested upon the coming generations, and a new chapter in Israel's history was about to be written. Thank you for following another inspiring story here at Stories of Faith and Overcoming. If this message touched your heart, leave a like, share with someone who needs inspiration, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next videos. Remember, with faith, courage, and God's love, we can overcome any challenge. See you in the next video, and may God bless you and your journey.